Hey, everyone. I hope you're ready, because today we're diving deep into one of the most chilling and timeless legends from Latin America, La Llorona, or as she's known in English, the Weeping Woman. This isn't your typical ghost story. It's one that's haunted families, whispered around campfires, and even had people claiming to have seen her wandering the riverbanks. And trust me, once you hear her story, rivers and lakes will never look the same to you. La Llorona's tale is so old and well known that there are countless versions, but at its heart, it's a story of tragedy, grief, and the terrifying consequences of a mother's unspeakable actions. Even now, hundreds of years after her story first spread, people still report sightings of her ghostly figure, hearing her heartbreaking cries late at night. So, grab a seat and let's explore this legend in detail, from its origins to the unsettling real-life encounters that continue to this day. The tale of La Llorona begins, as many tragic stories do, with a beautiful woman and a man who changed her life. Her name was Maria, though in some versions of the story, her name is never mentioned. Maria was known for her beauty, the kind that turned heads wherever she went. She lived in a small village, and though her family was poor, she dreamed of something greater, a life of love, comfort, and wealth. When a wealthy man, sometimes described as a ranchero or a nobleman, came into her life, it seemed like her dreams had come true. He was taken by her beauty and charm, and before long, they were married. Together they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and for a time, Maria's life was perfect. But as is the case with many legends, happiness is fleeting. After a few years, the man grew distant. Some versions of the story say he became bored of Maria, while others suggest he fell in love with another woman. Either way, he began to neglect her, spending long stretches of time away from their home, leaving Maria alone to care for the children. She was devastated. The man who once adored her now treated her as if she no longer existed. And as her grief and anger built up, it all came crashing down one terrible night. In a moment of madness, Maria took her children to the river and drowned them. It's said that she was so consumed by her rage and heartbreak, she acted without thinking. But as soon as their small bodies disappeared beneath the water, she realized what she had done. Overcome with guilt, she threw herself into the river, hoping to escape the unbearable pain. But death didn't bring her peace. Instead, she was cursed to wander the earth, searching for her lost children. Now, she is said to roam the banks of rivers and lakes, forever weeping, calling out, "Eh, mis hijos, oh my children," as she searches for them but never finds them. Her sorrow is eternal, and so is her haunting presence. Now here's where things get interesting. The basic elements of the La Llorona story are similar, but the details shift depending on where you hear it. This legend is like a mirror, reflecting the culture and beliefs of the people who tell it. In some versions, Maria's husband didn't just leave her, he married another woman. In these stories, her grief is tied not only to the loss of his love, but to her own humiliation. She feels cast aside, forgotten, and in that moment of despair, her anger turns deadly. She drowns her children not out of malice, but as a twisted way to hurt the man who hurt her. This version emphasizes betrayal, jealousy, and the destructive power of unchecked emotions. Other stories paint Maria in a more sympathetic light. In some regions of Mexico, people believe that she was a victim of circumstance, driven to madness by poverty and the overwhelming burden of raising her children alone. In these tales, her actions are seen as tragic, but almost inevitable, the result of a society that failed to support her. There's also a version of the legend where Maria is not driven by anger at all. Instead, she drowns her children to save them from a worse fate, perhaps starvation or illness during a time of famine or plague. In this telling, her actions are born of desperation, and her ghost is a symbol of eternal regret for the impossible choices she was forced to make. Across Latin America, you'll find even more variations. In Guatemala, for example, La Llorona's story takes on a more supernatural tone. There, she is believed to be an ancient spirit, not just a tragic mother, but a guardian of the dead, punishing those who dare to enter sacred or cursed waters. Each region has added its own layers to the story, but the core remains the same. A mother's grief, a terrible mistake, and the haunting that follows. As with many legends, it's not just the story that terrifies people, it's the fact that over the centuries, people have claimed to actually see La Llorona, or at least hear her eerie cries late at night. And these sightings? They aren't just from centuries ago. Even today, people swear they've encountered her along lonely riverbanks or near dark lakes. One of the most chilling accounts comes from Santa Fe, New Mexico, during the 1930s. A group of children, playing near the river one late afternoon, reported seeing a woman dressed in white standing near the water's edge. She was crying softly, her face hidden by her long hair. At first, the children thought nothing of it, just a sad woman by the river. But as the sky darkened and they got closer, they began to feel uneasy. One of the children claimed that as they approached, the woman slowly turned to face them, her eyes hollow and her expression twisted in grief. Frightened, they ran home, and later that night, something even more terrifying happened. One of those children drowned in the same river. The townspeople were horrified. They couldn't explain how the child had drowned, but whispers of La Llorona spread quickly. Many believe that the ghostly woman the children had seen was none other than La Llorona herself, luring the child to the water to take him as her own. And it's not just in New Mexico. In Texas, near the San Antonio River, there have been numerous sightings over the years. People living near the riverbanks have reported hearing a woman's sobs late at night, and some claim to have seen her ghostly figure moving through the mist, searching for her lost children. One story tells of a man walking his dog near the river one evening when he heard faint cries in the distance. Thinking someone was in trouble, he followed the sound, only to come face to face with a woman in a white gown, her face pale, her eyes dark and empty. As he stood frozen in fear, she reached out toward him, but before he could react, she disappeared into the night. His dog, sensing the danger, refused to move any closer to the river, barking and pulling him away. The man left, shaken by the experience, and swore never to walk near the river after dark again. Even more recently, in the early 2000s, there were reports from motorists in California who claimed to have seen a woman in white standing on the side of the road near a lake. Some said she appeared out of nowhere, her eyes fixed on them as they passed, while others reported hearing her cries as they drove by. These sightings, though fleeting, continue to feed the legend of La Llorona, making her more than just a story passed down through generations. So, what exactly is La Llorona? Is she just a ghost, or is there something darker at play? Over the centuries, people have developed all kinds of theories to explain her existence, each one more chilling than the last. The most straightforward theory is that La Llorona is a classic ghost, a spirit trapped between this world and the next because of the crime she committed. Her overwhelming guilt prevents her from finding peace, so she's doomed to wander the earth in search of her children. But here's the thing. In many ghost stories, spirits eventually fade or are laid to rest. Not La Llorona. She's been haunting rivers for centuries with no end in sight. It's as if her sorrow is so deep, her curse will never lift. But then there's the more sinister theory that La Llorona isn't just a ghost, but a demonic entity. According to this belief, her soul became so twisted by guilt and grief that she transformed into something far more dangerous. In this version of the story, La Llorona isn't just searching for her lost children, she's hunting the living, luring them to the water to drag them into the depths. Some say that if you hear her crying and follow the sound, she'll pull you under, taking you to the same watery grave as her children. Another theory suggests that La Llorona is a type of residual haunting. This means that she isn't an intelligent spirit, but rather a memory, an echo of the past that repeats itself endlessly. In this case, her cries aren't a call for help or revenge, but the result of an emotional event so powerful it imprinted itself on the land. The sounds people hear are just the echoes of her sorrow, played out over and over again. There's also a belief that La Llorona might not be a single entity, but a manifestation of collective grief. In this theory, She represents the universal pain of mothers who have lost their children, either through death, tragedy, or separation. Her legend could be seen as a symbol of mourning, the embodiment of every mother's worst nightmare. La Llorona's story isn't just a scary ghost tale. It's deeply embedded in the culture of Latin America and the southwestern U.S. In many ways, she represents more than just a ghost. She's a symbol of the deep connection between grief, guilt, and motherhood. For centuries, La Llorona's story has been used as a cautionary tale, especially for children. Parents would tell their kids not to wander too close to the water, warning them that La Llorona was always lurking nearby, ready to take them if they got too close. In this way, her story was used to keep children safe, but it also carried a much darker undertone, a reminder of the consequences of giving in to despair and rage. But beyond its role as a cautionary tale, La Llorona's legend speaks to the cultural fears and anxieties around motherhood. The idea of a mother killing her own children is so horrifying, so against the natural order, that it's no wonder the story has endured for so long. La Llorona's actions are seen as the ultimate betrayal, and her eternal punishment reflects society's view of such a crime. To understand the legend of La Llorona fully, it's essential to look deeper into her historical and cultural origins. The story of a weeping, wandering woman isn't just exclusive to Mexico. Similar figures have appeared in cultures across the world for centuries. However, in Latin American culture, La Llorona holds a unique place. Some folklorists believe that La Llorona's story may have its roots in Aztec mythology. Before the Spanish colonization of Mexico, the Aztecs had their own pantheon of gods and goddesses, and one of them was Cihuacoatl, the serpent woman. She was a maternal figure, often associated with childbirth and warfare. But Cihuacoatl wasn't just a nurturing mother. She was also a weeping spirit, mourning the loss of her children and predicting the fall of the Aztec Empire. In fact, some Aztec legends describe her wailing as a forewarning of the coming Spanish conquest and the destruction of their way of life. This connection is significant because it suggests that La Llorona may have evolved from pre-Hispanic beliefs, blending indigenous mythology with the moral tales brought by Spanish colonizers. The Spanish were known to introduce Christian narratives of sin, guilt, and punishment, and these themes are evident in the story of La Llorona, where a mother's sin, murdering her children, results in an eternal curse. The legend, therefore, is a fusion of indigenous and colonial elements, symbolizing the clash of cultures during one of the most traumatic periods in Mexico's history. In colonial times, stories of sinful women and tragic mothers were used as cautionary tales, often to reinforce societal expectations of women. The Spanish Church emphasized the idea of the ideal mother, nurturing, obedient, and pious. La Llorona became the antithesis of this, a reminder of what happens when a woman loses control, gives in to rage, and breaks the sacred bond of motherhood. It's also worth noting that during the colonial period, many indigenous women were forced into marriages or relationships with Spanish men, only to be abandoned once their usefulness or beauty faded. This aspect of the La Llorona legend, where a woman is left by her unfaithful husband and is driven mad by abandonment, might also reflect the very real experiences of many indigenous women during the colonization of the Americas. Their grief, rage, and sense of betrayal became personified in the form of La Llorona. La Llorona isn't the only ghostly figure in world folklore who mourns her lost children. Many cultures have their own versions of the weeping woman, which only strengthens the idea that her story taps into something deeply human, a shared fear or grief that transcends borders and time. In Irish mythology, there's the banshee, a female spirit who wails and cries as a harbinger of death. She doesn't take lives herself, but her cry is an omen that death is near, often signaling the passing of a family member. Like La Llorona, she's tied to the idea of sorrow and loss. Her cry is a chilling reminder that death is inevitable. In Japanese folklore, there's a similar figure known as the ubume. This spirit is said to be the ghost of a woman who died during childbirth or shortly after, leaving her child behind. Unable to rest, the Ubume roams the earth, looking for someone to care for her baby, or, in some versions, trying to reclaim her child from the living. Even in Greek mythology, the figure of Medea offers parallels to La Llorona. Medea, betrayed by her husband Jason, murders their children in a fit of revenge and grief. Though her story is framed differently, one of deliberate revenge rather than madness, it shares the core elements of betrayal, maternal sorrow, and the ultimate horror of a mother destroying her children. These stories reveal a common thread: the weeping, mourning woman as a symbol of deep sorrow, regret, and often a warning to those who encounter her. La Llorona's story may be uniquely Latin American in its setting and details, but her sorrow is universally understood. The story of La Llorona becomes even more unsettling when you consider the number of real-life encounters people claim to have had with her. Over the past century, sightings of La Llorona have been reported not just in rural areas, but in towns and cities across Mexico and the southwestern United States. In 1930s New Mexico, not long after the Santa Fe sighting, another chilling report surfaced from the small village of Alcalde. A family living near the Rio Grande claimed to hear a woman's cries every night for a week. At first, they dismissed it as the wind, but the cries grew louder and more distinct each night. The family described the sound as heart-wrenching, filled with an unbearable sadness. One night, the father of the family, curious and unnerved, went out to investigate. As he approached the river, he saw what he believed to be a woman in white, her face turned away from him, standing on the water's edge. He called out to her, thinking she was a lost traveler. When she didn't respond, he got closer, but just as he reached the riverbank, she turned around, and in place of a human face, he saw a gaunt, skeletal figure. Her eyes were hollow, and she let out a piercing wail before disappearing into the water. The man returned home shaken, and the family moved away shortly after, terrified of the encounter. These reports aren't just relics of the past. In Texas, near the San Antonio River, people have continued to report seeing La Llorona well into the 21st century. In 2005, a young couple claimed they were driving late at night near the river when they saw a figure on the side of the road. The woman was dressed in white, her hair flowing behind her. At first, they thought she might be in trouble, but as they got closer, the car's engine suddenly stalled. The figure turned toward them, and the couple described her face as being twisted in pain, her eyes filled with tears. Terrified, they tried to restart the car, and when it finally roared back to life, the figure had vanished. The couple sped away, but they never forgot the look on her face, a mixture of sorrow and something darker. In more recent years, La Llorona's sightings have even been reported in Los Angeles, near the Los Angeles River. In 2011, several people walking along the riverbank claimed to hear cries of a woman late at night. While some dismissed it as homeless individuals or animals making the sounds, others swore the voice sounded too human, too filled with sorrow to be anything ordinary. Given the persistent sightings of La Llorona, it's no surprise that paranormal researchers and ghost hunters have taken an interest in her legend. Over the years, several investigations have been conducted in areas where sightings are most common, particularly along rivers in New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico itself. Paranormal investigators often look for patterns in the stories, locations, times of day, even weather conditions that seem to coincide with La Llorona sightings. In many cases, sightings tend to happen near water, at night, and often when there's fog or mist in the air. The cries people hear are usually described as distant at first, growing louder as they approach, though many report never actually seeing the source of the sound. In 2014, a paranormal investigation team based in El Paso, Texas, conducted a series of nighttime stakeouts along the Rio Grande, where multiple La Llorona sightings had been reported. Using thermal imaging cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors, which measure changes in electromagnetic fields often associated with paranormal activity, they hoped to capture evidence of the spirit. While they didn't record any definitive proof of La Llorona herself, they did pick up faint audio recordings of what sounded like distant crying, and their EMF detectors spiked several times in areas where no electrical interference should have been present. Similar investigations have been conducted along the canals of Xochimilco, a popular tourist destination in Mexico City, which is also said to be one of La Llorona's favorite haunting grounds. Many boatmen in Xochimilco have told stories of hearing the wails of a woman at night or of seeing her figure standing on the banks as they row tourists through the ancient canals. The eerie setting of Xochimilco, with its dark waters and misty air, only adds to the sense of otherworldliness surrounding La Llorona's legend. After hearing all the stories and sightings, the question remains, is La Llorona real? Of course, this depends on what you believe. Skeptics argue that many La Llorona sightings can be explained away by natural phenomena. The sounds of animals, like owls or coyotes, can often mimic human cries, especially near water, where sound travels differently. The mist and fog that often accompany these sightings could play tricks on the eyes, making a shadow or a tree branch look like a woman standing by the riverbank. Others believe that the power of La Llorona's legend is what makes her real. As the story is passed down through generations, it gains strength, and the collective belief in her presence might manifest in paranormal experiences. This phenomenon, sometimes referred to as a tulpa in paranormal studies, suggests that belief in an entity can actually bring it into existence. If enough people believe in La Llorona, she may become more than just a story. She becomes a real presence, haunting those who believe in her. For those who have encountered her, or believe they have, La Llorona is undeniably real. Her cries, her ghostly figure, her sorrow are as much a part of their world as any other reality. Whether she's a ghost, a demon, or something more abstract, the impact of her legend is very real. La Llorona is more than just a legend. She's a symbol of grief, loss, and the darker side of motherhood. Her story has persisted for centuries, surviving not just because it scares people, but because it taps into something much deeper, our fears of abandonment, guilt, and the consequences of our actions. She's been with us since ancient times, and it seems she's not going anywhere. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, La Llorona's presence is undeniable in the cultural landscape. Her story continues to evolve, passed from generation to generation, each retelling adding new layers to her legend. And perhaps that's what makes her so terrifying. She isn't just a ghost that haunts rivers. She's a reflection of the sorrow that lives within all of us, a reminder that some mistakes can never be undone and some wounds never heal. If you ever find yourself walking near a river at night and you hear soft cries in the distance, remember La Llorona. It might just be the wind, but then again, maybe it's not.